Michael Brown lost his life 6 months ago. The unarmed African-American teen shot to death by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. We've seen the protest, heard the calls for change. Well, tonight in our Al Jazeera special, Race in America, we're taking a look at the impact of his story on police and race relations across America. Has anything changed since, and what could possibly change going forward? This week, FBI Director James Comey gave an unprecedented speech about race in law enforcement at Georgetown University. He's calling for a new federal database to track police-involved shootings in the United States. The current system is voluntary and only tracks fatal incidents, and many police departments do not submit reports to the Justice Department. Comey also says there needs to be change in attitudes.
We must better understand the people we serve and protect by trying to know deep in our gut what it feels like to be a law-abiding young black man walking down the street and encountering law enforcement. We must understand how that young man may see us.
Comey says an open and honest discussion must happen in the U.S. and that police departments must confront unconscious biases officers may have. Well, that brings us to the story of William Wingate. After he retired, the veteran made a point of taking a walk every day using a golf club as a cane. But one day last summer, a police officer accused him of threatening her and threw him in jail. Alan Schaffler takes a look at the case that's sparking outrage.
What do we want? Justice! What do we want it now?
In Seattle, golf club carrying protesters call for police reform and rally in support of William Wingate. The 70-year-old marches with a cane instead of the putter he has walked with for years. All because of this. Last July 9th, a police officer confronts him, saying he threatened her with his golf club.
Can you put that down, please?
What?
Aren't you holding a golf club?
I can't hear you over there.
Your golf club.
What about my golf club?
Can you please set it down?
In the video, Wingate appears startled and tells us he just didn't know what was going on.
I thought she was looking for a shoplifter. You know, that's what I thought. Or maybe I jaywalked or something. I had no idea.
22 times, Officer Cynthia Whitlatch asks Wingate to drop the golf club.
What's going on?
Put it down.
This is my golf club.
I'm not going to take it from you, but it's a weapon, so set it down.
I had this golf club for 20 years.
Set it down.
5 times she accuses him of threatening her.
You're being audio and videotaped.
No, you call somebody. I ain't done nothing to nobody.
You just swung that golf club at me.
I did not.
Yes, you did, right back there.
I didn't see you. I didn't wave no golf club.
It was on audio and videotape. Put it down. You're not free to leave.
And you're talking about yeah, you're right here.
Set your golf club down. Set it down. Set it down.
But nowhere in the dash cam video released by police is Wingate shown swinging the club.
So now why would I have a reason to swing a golf club at her before?
So you never swung it at her in a threatening way?
For what?
The Air Force veteran and retired bus driver, who says he's never had a problem with police before, is hauled off to jail to face harassment and obstruction charges. His putter legally defined as a weapon and confiscated.
That was one of the most miserable 20 or 25-minute ride I've ever had. You know, I didn't know if I was a good idea alive or not, because you help it. You know, your hand behind your back.
A month later, former Washington State Representative Don Mason heard about the arrest.
If this had been a white man this age doing exactly what Mr. Wingate was doing, the officer would have never stopped, would have never noticed him, and this would never have come up.
Quietly, with no publicity, Mason went to work on Wingate's behalf with a racially mixed team, hoping to clear his name.
So I enlisted some white women. We had a brand new white police chief. And it was a white female officer who did the arrest.
Seattle police have cause for concern. The department is operating under Department of Justice rules, a federal monitor keeping an eye on things after a series of racially charged incidents. Long before a local newspaper's request brought the Wingate video to light, Mason and her supporters, working their contacts at City Hall, made progress. The Seattle Police Department finally offered a public apology. William Wingate got his golf club back, and the city attorney has deferred charges for now. But Wingate is now suing the city for $750,000 and has become a symbol for the police reform movement. We tried to contact Officer Whitlatch, but were not successful. She has now been put on administrative leave. Her boss, the chief of police, has not been available for interviews. Dawn Mason admits not everybody on the street has a team like hers behind them, and says despite positive response from city leaders, the system failed William Wingate.
Police chiefs don't apologize to black men. Not in this country, not in this city. But Chief O'Toole did. That's a win. And I'm not going to take that from her. Does she have a lot of work to do with it? Yes. She has to put systems together in that department that just don't exist.
You know, I sure appreciate it.
Well, Seattle is a boom town thanks to companies like Amazon and Microsoft. It is ranked as one of the fastest growing major cities in the United States, but Seattle is also the 5th whitest major city in the nation. And the black population in particular is shrinking. Tanya Mosley takes a look at what this means for black families moving to Seattle in search of opportunity and a sense of belonging.
Angelique Okeke has been thinking a lot lately about the meaning of the word community. 6 months ago, she and her family moved from Washington, D.C. to Seattle, where Angelique now works for Amazon. Looking back, they remember someone making a joke as they boarded the plane to leave D.C., a city where half the population is black.
Sentiment was pretty much, wave bye-bye to black people because this is it. That's the last you're going to see.
The OKKs knew what they were getting into, but they weren't prepared for how isolating it would feel to live in a city where one could go days without seeing another person of color.
It's not an easy thing to do to just, okay, I'm going to happen to be in Seattle and I'll know exactly kind of where to go to church, where to get my hair done, where I can go for whatever kind of African-American movies, theater, books, and other culture. When you go to a place and you see no one that looks like you and you actually have to do research to figure out where folks that look like you are and then realize they're scattered around. Okay, so what's a kind of a unifying event?
Hey Ben, Jacob!
The shift has been especially taxing on their 2 sons. Their oldest recently asked his mother a question.
He wanted to know when we were going home. And I said, we're home. See, there's the Space Needle, Safeco Field. Look, we're home. And he said, no, Mom, we've just been on vacation. We've been on vacation here in Seattle too long. It made me feel like, okay, from the mouths of babes, maybe we should listen to him and just throw in the towel and let's go home.
But they have decided to stick it out. They even found a diverse school 45 minutes away. It's a long drive, but worth it if it means their kids won't be the only black ones in their class.
When you're the one of one, as my wife put it, you're to play that role and you speak for all black people. So if a black issue, so to speak, a quote unquote black issue comes up, everyone's looking to hear what you have to say because now you're the spokesperson at 7 for all black people in America. And that's a lot for a child to bear.
Great job. Hopefully
the growing pains of uncharted territory as the OKKs create a new definition of community. Tanya Mosley, Al Jazeera, Seattle.
Well, for more on our discussion of race in America, I'd like to introduce my 2 guests this evening. Opal Tometi, she's the co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement and executive director of the Black Allegiance for Just Immigration, and Dante Barry, the executive director of Million Hoodies Movement for Justice, which was founded following the death of Trayvon Martin. Thanks so much for coming in this evening. So many issues that I want to address with you all this evening. One of those is more of a legal matter. And when you talk to minorities in this country, specifically black people, they often say that the reason there's issues between them and the police is because the police seem to be able to do whatever they want to black people and never get punished for it, whether it's killing young black people, beating them up, what have you. We heard earlier from FBI Director James Comey about having a national database for police-involved shootings. Would that help at all for black people to have a little more trust in the system if officers have to face some type of justice?
Yes, I think absolutely. I think one of the calls that we've been seeing from the Black Lives Matter movement and many other organizations across the United States is this call for tracking of these types of cases, these types of incidents of police brutality and extrajudicial killings in our community. We definitely think that accountability must be had. We need to see justice in our communities. However, I think the other thing that we're really looking for is more fundamental. So we're looking for more investment in our communities and divestment from the mechanisms that criminalize our communities. We're looking for divestment in police. We need more investment in our communities, and so I think that's ultimately what we're calling for. However, this is one kind of program that might help hold some accountable.
You know, Dante, when it comes to the criminal justice system, black people often are very skeptical of everyone involved in it. But then the counter argument is that most black people don't do enough to be involved in the system themselves, whether trying to get out of jury duty or go vote, make sure you have the right district attorney in office. What is the responsibility of black people in their community if they want to affect change within the criminal justice system?
I think it's a difficult question in the conditions that we're in today. Okay. And I think it's hard, and I don't condone it, I don't celebrate it, but I think it's hard for some folks to feel like they can trust into a system that isn't protecting them in any way. So I think for some folks that's really hard for them to deal with. But also I think there's an escapable amount of capacity that we need to be putting into to helping folks understand how these democratic processes work for them and how we can really fit into this power structure there.
One thing we want to talk about as well is just the basic belief or thoughts of people that you don't know. And a good example is the story we saw in Seattle with Mr. Wingate simply standing on a corner holding a golf club. I mean, that was kind of personal for me because he reminded me of my father, because he used to carry a golf club, and all he was doing is standing on a corner. It appears as if the police officer saw this black man holding a club, and she didn't see it as a golf club, she saw it as a weapon. And as someone said in the piece earlier, if it had been a white person doing the same thing, the reaction from the police officer wouldn't have been the same. Is that simply because what some people think of other people simply because of the color they see? Or is it deeper than that? Is there something they expect black people to be criminals?
I think it's deeper. I think there's a couple things. One, there's this piece of implicit bias, right? Yes. And this understanding in which that folks of all races have some type of bias of different groups of people. So you have to come to that. But then there's this also issue around the practice of policing itself. And that's a little bit more of an explicit bias and explicit racism and discriminatory in every sense. So I think when we look at that, we also need to examine how the issue is multifaceted in terms of how we're dealing with racism itself.
Bias, that's something that's, you know, sometimes easy to see but hard to really explain and how it really comes up. You know, for much of white America, when parents sit down to have that talk with their kids, it's usually a discussion about the birds and the bees. But for many black families, there's a different type of education involved with the talk. It's a discussion about carrying yourself in public and how to interact with police. At one high school in Washington, D.C., the ACLU is offering a class that teaches students their rights and gives them advice on navigating situations with law enforcement.
We hope that by giving young people very concrete ideas to focus on, that they're going to get in and out of these situations as safely and quickly as possible.
Now, many parents say these discussions have taken on an added sense of urgency after the deaths of Michael Brown in Missouri and Eric Garner in New York. I remember the talk that I had with my father when I was very young, and it involved a situation with police, and I was upset with the police officer. My dad was upset with me because in his mind, I gave them an excuse to do something to me. And that was the inherent fear that he had of what would happen to his son, possibly involving police. I don't think white America understands how important that conversation is within the black community.
Yep, I think that's right. And unfortunately, countless families all across the U.S. have to have those types of conversations with their young children, both men and women, girls and boys. They're having those types of conversations. And it's unfortunate because what it ends up looking like is that we have to present ourselves a certain type of way. We have to carry ourselves and comport ourselves around everyday kinds of interactions with any kind of person. And the situation oftentimes escalates in a way that we don't have any control over. And so we're blamed for incidents of violence. We saw with Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown, their character was actually attacked. Right. When we know that there were innocent young boys who were targeted by the police. And so it's really unfortunate that parents in this day and age have to have those types of conversations with their young ones.
Plenty more topics to discuss. Please stay with us as we continue our special Race in America tonight here on Al Jazeera America. Coming up after the break, we'll take a look at the changing face of America and bring you the story of Ravi Lal.
Check the box, which ethnicity are you? And I think I checked like 3 or 4. I checked multiple boxes, and I was like, well, this might mess it up, but this is who I am, you know?
Up next, the growing number of multiracial families and the future of the white majority in the U.S.
Tomorrow, Rain Pryor.
Everyone wants you to be that thing, and I'm not that thing. I'm like, hello, I'm me.
Surviving a chaotic childhood.
I'm like, Dad, there are hookers in this house.
And breaking free and following her own path.
You come to a show of mine, someone in that audience didn't like what I just said.
Every Sunday, join us for exclusive, revealing, and surprising talks with the most interesting people of our time. Talk to Al Jazeera tomorrow, 5:30 Eastern. Part of our special Black History Month coverage on Al Jazeera America.
Because we need more places that set our spirits free.
To cast our lines. To have first dates.
To break a sweat.
Because we need to share the stories of our favorite places.
Help the Trust for Public Land protect open spaces by sharing why nature matters to you.
The Trust for My Land.
For our land. The Trust for Public Land.
You know how they say that everybody has a purpose in life? Well, at one time I felt that selling cocaine was my purpose.
We were starving, just looking for a way to succeed.
The first time I seen rock cocaine was 1980.
Murder rate was sky high.
South of the 10 freeway was kind of a no man's land.
So, you know, we're selling it to the blacks. So you go into these neighborhoods, there's no cops, you can sell it where you want, and when they start killing each other, nobody cares.
I was going through like $1 million worth of drugs just about every day.
That's like gold. We can make a fortune.
He was maybe the biggest guy in LA.
Freeway Rick was getting his dope from a very big operator. I think we're into something that's bigger than us, something we really can't deal with.
They had been trafficking on behalf of the United States government.
She could prove what she was saying.
Crack in the system.
Our special Race in America will continue in just a moment, but first, breaking news now out of Denmark. Police there say 3 people were shot outside a popular synagogue in Copenhagen. Police say the gunman escaped on foot. This happened only hours after a deadly shooting at a cafe. In that incident, 1 person was shot in the head and 2 police officers were wounded at a public debate on art, blasphemy, and free speech. Police say it's too early to say if the attacks are connected. Now we return to our special Race in America. Tonight we're discussing Race in America here in Al Jazeera. Once again, I'd like to welcome our guest, Opal Tometi, Executive Director of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and Dante Barry, the Executive Director of Million Hoodies Movement for Justice. The Census Bureau projects that within 30 years, white people will no longer be the majority in the U.S., but those numbers are based on some questionable assumptions. Science and Technology correspondent Jacob Ward explains.
The Census Bureau has just released numbers that say that non-Hispanic whites, that's me everybody, are going to drop out of the majority by 2044. Right now, folks like me account for about 63% of the U.S. population. And by 2030, that number will drop to 55.5%, and then by 2044, they'll drop below half. Now, the thing is, that math is totally unreliable. Fertility rates change, immigration rates change, but there's another fundamental problem. The whole notion of a majority or a minority in the United States is a pretty primitive concept, and that's because it doesn't take into account a few very fundamental things.
First, people are having kids with people of other ethnic and racial backgrounds.
In 1960, only 0.4% of marriages in the U.S. were multiracial. In 2010, it was 8.4% overall. And when you look at multiracial marriages, those most likely to marry outside their race are whites and Hispanics. And here's the thing, 44% of the time, they marry one another. Also, people don't identify themselves the same way throughout their lives. In fact, in the 2010 census, almost 10 million people changed their racial category as compared to the 2000 census. That's roughly 8% of Americans changing their minds about who they are. And the census still doesn't know how to handle multiracial people. You can check multiple boxes, but 6.2% of 2010 census respondents selected some other race. That's a group of people the U.S. government basically doesn't have the data to identify by race or ethnicity. Now, we account for people changing their spouses and moving from place to place and having more kids over the course of their lives. So why can't our math account for a change of personal identity? By 2044, the world is going to be a very different place, full of extraordinary innovations. And one of them is going to have to be a more sophisticated way of accounting for the melting together of all the different races in a very multiracial America. Jacob Ward, Al Jazeera, San Francisco.
Well, as Jake just showed us, a person's race can be difficult to identify. That's the case for one San Francisco family that represents the changing face of a new America.
My name is Ravi Lau Apana Persley. More commonly, I go by Ravi Lau, just kind of a long name.
You're awfully heavy for a ghost.
And I am very lucky to be married to my wife, Sandy Chan, and have two great kids, Kaimana and Makoa. And this is my dad, Peter Persley. All of the family reunions were very diverse, just all the different blood family members, as well as people who had, other relationships, people who had married into. So that's kind of the world that I grew up in. My dad's dad, he's African American, but black, but from Louisiana. So that's really Creole. So I am hungry. On my mom's side, her father was Hawaiian Chinese, ethnically more Chinese, but culturally Hawaiian because he grew up in Hawaii. And her mom, who's still alive, is white, Irish, and English.
I was born in 1942 in San Francisco and raised in Berkeley. My parents were what was called an interracial marriage, which at the time they got married, which was 1939, was actually still illegal in California.
Swing music was a really big thing, so Sweet's Ballroom right on Broadway in Oakland, they decided to go, I think, on the colored night to Sweet's Ballroom, and the doorman, and it was right at that time when things were changing in America, and they just marched right up, and the guy at the door was like, "Hey, sorry, we're not going to do that, folks. We don't, we got to do."
They said, "Not tonight." And they said, "Well, why not tonight?"
Yeah, why not? Right. Why not tonight?
They let him in. People would say, "Well, what are you?" Well, American. United States. No, but what are you though? You know, that wasn't quite an answer. You know? My mother's side, right now, that side of my family is traced directly back to the Mayflower.
I remember, I think, maybe it was taking the SAT for the first time my sophomore year in high school, and it's like, check the box, which ethnicity are you? And I think I checked like 3 or 4. I checked multiple boxes, and I was like, well, this might mess it up, but this is this is who I am, The privilege part of it is that it's allowed me to see race as a construct. And so even though people might have thought that I was a certain ethnicity or tried to kind of characterize me, or maybe they were kind of acting in a racist way, thinking that I'm this or that, I was never any of those things. So I could sort of escape that categorization. He's not the first black president. He's really the first biracial or multiracial or, mixed person. We're a relatively young-ish country, so I think that this is kind of this stage of identity crisis of like, previously America looked like this, and we were only these kinds of people, with light skin and talking a certain way. And I think the reality of like America is this incredible mix of people.
Well, that's a very good reminder of how the face of America is changing. And as it changes, how you identify certain races is also changing. What is black? What is Latino? What is Asian? And as we start to evolve and change, Dante, do you see this helping race relations, or maybe being a little more divisive inside of it?
You know, it's funny, as we were watching that clip, I kept thinking about how America as a country has been designed to push identities onto other people, right. Regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual identity. We've been able to push ourselves, and America has been designed to push people, particularly marginalized folks, in a space where we have to pick and choose what our identities are and our roles are, without having us come to terms about what that looks like and what that means for us individually. So I think when we have this conversation about having a more diverse America, I think that piece right there gets a little bit more muddled.
You know, when you see people that are open to new ideas and new people, the more they encounter, their views likely change based on what they thought they knew prior. And we always say, how many black friends do you have? Then you probably know a little bit, you might view a black person differently. Or how many Asian people do you know in your life? If America changes, Opal, and you start seeing more and more of this branching out, so to speak, you would think and be hopeful that race relations would get much better, maybe even faster than we thought they would.
Yes, I think that is the hope. That is absolutely the hope. I think there are a lot of different types of, communities in the United States. We look at even immigrant communities, so Latino, Asian, African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants. There's a range of us who are actually here with various, immigration statuses and various ways that they have to navigate the system and our society. And I think as we begin to recognize that our society is changing, hopefully there will be more interactions that allow for people to open up, to accept more and more of their neighbors. However, I don't think it's inevitable. I do think that there is a need for us to address systems of power, and we need to make sure that our laws are protecting everyday people.
That's a good point. That is a need, and most people would recognize that. How do you make it happen, especially in a swift manner? How do you do it?
Nothing's going to come fast, and I think when we think about social change, the civil rights movement took decades, right? So when we think about the policies that we're trying to push back or create, and the institutions that we're trying to push back and create as well, that takes time. And I think that in this day and age because we have social media and instant access to internet, a lot of things is instant gratification and the need to have something happen right now, right quick. But ultimately, this takes time. And I think when we look at how we create more transformative societies, it's going to be better in the long run when we think about that more intentionally.
Real quickly, do you have enough young people involved in making some type of positive change?
Absolutely. We have a lot of young people, but we need everybody. It's actually going to take a multiracial movement to build a multiracial democracy that works for all of us.
Thank you so much for coming in this evening. Again, we could probably sit here for another hour or two and just continue this discussion. Opal Tometi and Dante Barry, thanks so much, and continued success in the work that you're trying to do within the respective communities. Well, I'm Michael Leaves here in New York. Thank you for watching this edition of Al Jazeera America. My colleague Thomas Drayton will be back with more news coming up after this break. Have a good evening.